This past Monday, Kristen took a bus down to Maryland for a family funeral. This was a particularly sad gathering to grieve the death of Judy, the 53-year-old wife of Kristen's cousin Dana. Judy and Dana have 3 children, ages 17, 22, and 27. And the day before Thanksgiving, Judy laid down to take a nap and never woke up. Despite the efforts of her youngest son to resuscitate, Judy's heart failed and she died. And the loss is tremendous. In her life, Judy loved teaching and playing with children. She was a wonderful wife and mother who now leaves this world behind, including many dreams for a life now cut too short. In her poem entitled Poppies, Unitarian Universalist patron saint poet Mary Oliver writes, "The poppies send up their orange flares, swaying in the wind. Their congregations are a levitation of bright dust and thin and lacy leaves. Of course, nothing stops the cold, black, curved blade from hooking forward. Of course, loss is the great lesson." As so beautifully expressed in Oliver's poetry, our souls have learned countless times loss is the great lesson. And we sure do learn that lesson because we lose time and again. Shockingly this week, a charter plane crash rocked the nation of Brazil. All 77 people on board died. They were all part of the soccer team from Chapecoense, Brazil. That plane, which tragically ran out of fuel, just missed making a successful emergency landing, crashed into the mountains of Colombia. The Chapecoense soccer team had been making a Cinderella run for the South American Cup tournament. You know, most Brazilians breathe and dream soccer. So the tragedy hits harder than most in the United States can imagine. And many Brazilians anguish exponentially over the plane crash because of other difficulties of life. The Brazilian economy for some time now struggles mightily, making earning a subsistence level next to impossible for tens of millions. Political corruption at all levels creates crises, resulting in the recent impeachment of the Brazilian president. Drugs and violence regularly shake the people of the poor favelas to the core. The Brazilian people know nothing stops the cold, dark, curved blade from hooking forward. Of course, loss is the lesson. My colleague Galen Gingrich preached a sermon using this Mary Oliver poem, inviting us all to reflect upon lessons we have learned from loss. During the holidays, so many of us wrestle with grieving the loss of a loved one or heartbreaking disappointment during a season when celebration is expected. During this season, during the sacred season, we feel more poignantly than ever Mary Oliver's truth: loss is the great lesson. So in this holiday season, we may benefit from articulating together just what is the lesson. What do our experiences of loss teach us? A first lesson of loss is accepting that life always involves loss. This reality is embedded in the first noble truth of Buddhism, which says life is suffering. When we live, when we pay attention, and certainly when we love, sometimes we lose. Sometimes you lose. Nobody escapes what Shakespeare called the ominous owl of death. We all die. And it's also true that while we are alive, loss happens again and again. Loss can be immense or incremental, arise out of nowhere or long awaited. Loss can involve a failed pregnancy or a long time developing need to walk on that cane. Loss can involve losing your job as your company downsizes, bringing not only loss of income, but also possibly loss of identity and purpose, or loss of friendships with those coworkers. Loss can also involve the change over time of dear friendship to less intimacy. Sometimes two lives go in different directions, and previously well-bonded friends no longer share much in common except for memories. And that distance can create lament over the loss of what was. The neurologist, Dr. Oliver Sacks, wrote about his experiences working with some of his patients. At age 65, while driving, Jonathan was hit by a small truck on the passenger side of his car. And at that time, the accident did not seem serious. However, shortly after the accident, Jonathan lost his memory of the accident and suffered severe headaches. For about a week, Jonathan experienced blurred vision and an inability to read. Eventually, in a somewhat unusual twist, Jonathan's inability to read was replaced by an inability to recognize colors. Jonathan explained that in a matter of days, my world turned gray. It looked as if everything had become molded in lead. Jonathan's inability to see colors did not go away. He lost the greens and blues of spring, the yellows and reds of fall. All his food looked gray and unattractive. This was most difficult because Jonathan was also an accomplished painter. He was devastated by the loss of his artistic abilities. Describing the new world in which he found himself, Jonathan used words like wrong, unnatural, stained, and disgusting. Swimming in grief, Jonathan began isolating from friends. A second lesson of loss is to take time and make space to grieve. Take time and make space to grieve. When you lose something of value, honor your feelings. Try to avoid the cheap or unrealistically fast escape hatches. Connect with caring and supportive people. Get into that give and take. Kristen's family, including me, many Brazilians, and Jonathan all need to grieve. And know that every experience of grieving is uniquely personal. As a parish minister, I am honored to accompany people in grieving. And the unpredictability of individuals grieving a loss is fascinating. For example, with a stable, happy person who loses his or her 97-year-old parent, one might predict less grieving, and one might be wrong. On the other hand, with a person already experiencing significant hardships, and a tragedy befalls him or her, one might predict debilitating, long-term grief, and one might be wrong. You just don't know how it's going to go. A lesson I have learned sharing loss with many people is do not grieve a certain way because you think you should. Don't grieve how you think you should. After a major loss, you may not need to wear black for a year, or perhaps you may want to for many years. Grieve what your soul needs. Grieving fully can open our souls, even to the point of feeling reverence for loss. Reverence is the spiritual theme of the month here, and we say reverence is the way of respecting and honoring the presence of the sacred in our bodies, other sentient beings, plants, rocks, the earth, the waters, and reverence can honor the sacred in experience. Reverence can involve amazement at the miracle and mystery of life and existence itself. In your losses, as you grieve, can you sense something sacred? Can you find moments when you touch depth, wonder, or awe? Eventually, we transition on from the darkness of loss, and another lesson of loss is that at some point, it becomes helpful to focus less on why a particular loss happened and to focus increasingly on what you can do next. What can you do with what you have now? Kristen and I were latecomers to the television show Downton Abbey. Then we got all in. Lush, green, rolling fields and regal manors provide a setting where rich and poor go through living. Matthew and Mary, although very privileged, also experience hardships. Matthew serves harrowing tours of duty in the Great War, and his first wife dies of illness. Mary's sister dies of an infection contracted at childbirth. After Mary and Matthew marry each other, infertility wears heavily upon their hearts. Finally, Matthew and Mary give birth to a healthy baby boy, and immediately following the birth, driving the countryside while joyously oblivious to a dangerous curve, Matthew has a deadly accident. 6 months later, as a widow with an infant, Mary finds herself in a crushing depression, which impedes her from even loving her new baby. Granny listens rightfully as Mary laments life's deep lack of fairness. And Granny says, yes, this is exceedingly difficult. But my dear, Granny says, you have a straightforward choice before you. You must choose death or life. You must choose death or life. I've watched that scene repeatedly, and every time it rocks me to the core. In a world with so much suffering and loss, we all face a straightforward choice. Do you choose death or life? I think the answer that comes from our souls, even in the depths of the most painful loss, is that we choose life. And it's not less life we want, it's more life. Life is short. From the time I was very young, maybe age 10, I remember being taken aback by the realization of how little time each human being gets on this planet. I've always been awed, probably like you, by how much there is to see, do, explore, learn, love, grow. Life is short. So even in the midst of inevitable loss, I believe we are called to live life to the fullest. After the recent election, I received a touching email from a longtime friend of mine in USG, Greg Robinson. This is Gene Robinson's son. Greg, he gave me permission to share his thoughts this morning. He wrote, "Given recent events in our electoral process, I know many are struggling with finding hope for brotherhood and sisterhood. With the possibility of helping others, I thought I'd share how I generate hope. The first way is by realizing I am still me. The election has not changed me. I still promote positivity in my own life, and I realize that I still have the ability to demonstrate positivity to others. Secondly, when I experience a great loss, I know the faster I can get back on my feet and do my work as a Unitarian Universalist, as a unifier, the more I demonstrate to myself that I can move forward in life. This doesn't mean I don't have tears in my eyes from time to time." He said, "I've worked out in the gym with tears in my eyes. I've traveled with tears in my eyes. I've walked down the street with tears in my eyes, and yet I'm still on my feet moving forward." I was in the gym recently, he said, and I heard a loud thud. Someone running on the treadmill had fallen, and literally half the gym, including myself, stopped to ask if the person who fell was okay and needed anything. Seeing so many people concerned and ready to help was an experience that filled me with hope. Greg's story makes me think, when one door closes, another door opens, or when one door closes, you can open another door, or you can pry it open, or you can knock it down with something. You can find something to knock it down and go on to a new place. Somehow Jonathan, the artist who lost his ability to see colors, eventually made his way through the door to a new place. As Jonathan went on after his car accident, he began to explore the uniqueness of his condition. He noticed that he saw better in subdued light or at twilight. He also noticed a heightened sense of movement and depth. Subtle textures and patterns, normally obscured because they're embedded in color, stood out for him. At one point, Jonathan realized that maybe he had been given a gift to see the sunrise in a way few others had ever seen before. He said, "I now recognize that while my disability did indeed destroy my world, it also offered me a whole new world in exchange." After seeing color blindness as a curse, I now have somehow come to see it as something that has invited me to experience a new and different way of seeing, imagining, and being human. Loss, which can destroy your world, can also offer a whole new world in exchange. How does your loss invite you to grapple with the depths or touch the sacred? How does your loss invite you to experience a new and different way of seeing, imagining, and being human? Blessings be. Amen.